Welcome to this week's episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. On this week's episode, we look into the Palestinian Civil War and how Hamas is winning. Let's get started. On a previous podcast in September called The Quiet Palestinian Civil War, we looked into the growing evidence that there's a civil war happening within Palestinian society between the Palestinian Authority, known as Fatah, and their adversaries in Gaza, Hamas. What used to be a more Cold War-style situation has been boiling over into a hot civil war in the past few years. In order to better understand what's going on now, we need to look into the history of these two groups and how we got here. Originally, from the inception of the unique Palestinian identity, the group didn't have much of a formal leadership. The Palestinian Liberation Organization, or PLO, a terrorist organization, was one of the first groups to gain support and raise their stature enough to become the unofficial voice of the Palestinian people. If you've listened to some of our older podcasts, you'll already know that the PLO was set up to resist occupation. However, this occupation that they were resisting was not the modern fictional story of occupation by Israel that we hear quite regularly. The PLO was resisting the occupation by the country who had full control over their people, the Jordanians. You may recall from our previous podcast, The Lesser-Known Two-State Solution, we looked into how after the 1948 war against Israel, started by Arab nations, Jordan refused to give up the area known today as the West Bank, filled with many Arabs who arrived during the Muslim-controlled Ottoman Empire. Jordan refused to grant these people any rights within Jordan, which led to an armed struggle against an actual occupation. It was such a problem for the Arab world that many countries attempted to remove Jordan from the Arab League due to their holding of the West Bank and mistreatment of their newly conquered people. The Palestinian identity was created in the 1950s and 1960s to separate themselves from the Jordanian Arabs who had been mistreating them for years. This set the stage for Yasser Arafat in the 1950s to create a terrorist organization with an aim to free themselves from the Jordanian oppression. The PLO, or Fatah, was created and engaged in various terror campaigns, which no doubt raised their profile among Palestinians and the world. With this raised profile, the PLO, under Arafat, became the unofficial representatives for the Palestinian people at various peace accords. The Arab League eventually brokered a peace deal between the longtime enemies of Jordan and the Palestinian people. Once they had peace with their oppressors, the Jordanians, the PLO under Arafat shifted their hate towards the State of Israel. At this point, the people today known as the Palestinian people were spread between Jordan, Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, and Gaza. However, under the various peace attempts, the Fatah, or PLO group, under Arafat, became legitimate on the world stage, including granting them official leadership over the entire Palestinian people. This leadership role did not mean that Fatah went fully legitimate and ended the attacks against Israel. Amazingly, the Fatah group maintained an armed wing and a political wing, somehow convincing the world that they were two different groups with no connection to one another. The insanity of the world thinking that a group with a terrorism wing is an honest broker for peace is beyond belief. The Fatah group continued to negotiate in bad faith while planning the first Intifada in the 1980s. Many people know the terrible days of the Intifada, but many, who haven't heard our previous podcasts, may be less aware of the Palestinian Intrafada. This was a secondary war against those Palestinians who stood up or spoke out against Yasser Arafat. Arafat and his armed wing murdered many fellow Palestinian people in order to maintain power and legitimacy as the official leadership of the Palestinian people. Following the Intifada and the Palestinian Intrafada, Arafat gained more legitimacy on the world stage with future peace attempts. He even got the official title as the president of the newly formed Palestinian Authority, the official government in the West Bank and Gaza. However, as much legitimacy as Arafat was getting on the world stage, many people were not too pleased with Fatah and Arafat for various reasons. Some did not like the death and destruction caused by the leadership during the Intifada, and others may not have supported Arafat, who was making peace deals with the State of Israel. One of the groups who was founded in response to Arafat's peace attempts was the group now known as Hamas, which was formed in the late 1980s. Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, an Islamist political group that focuses on religion and social issues. One of Hamas's main objections to the Palestinian Authority, under Arafat, is the willingness to negotiate at all over any piece of the land. Learning from the other Islamic groups, Hamas established a political and terrorist wing. This allowed them to split their political actions from their acts of terror and claim not to be associated with the terror altogether. By this time, Hamas's political wing is beginning to gain support among Gaza Palestinians. Their focus on trying to provide Palestinians with education and social services proves popular in a population who has spent 20 years under the Palestinian Authority that has maintained a poor lifestyle with little improvement, despite their repeated negotiations with Israel. Sadly, what many Palestinians in Gaza were unaware of at the time was Hamas's social programs and improvements to their lives came with corruption, death, and terrorism. As Hamas gains ground within Gaza, the power struggle between the two political and terrorist groups grows, until something unexpected happens. The early 2000s sends shockwaves through the Palestinian society. In 2004, the leader of the Palestinian Authority, Yasser Arafat, dies. A man who ruled his people with an iron fist and the architect of the guerrilla-style terrorism has left a spot at the top for the next person. Just before his death, the international world was trying to impress upon Arafat that he should step down and appoint a subordinate, Mahmoud Abbas, to the top position of the Palestinian Authority government. This could be because Abbas was seen as more willing to negotiate for peace, or maybe people knew that at Arafat's age he was a liability and would leave a vacuum after his death if he didn't appoint anybody. Arafat did not take this news very well and did not fully support the change in leadership. But eventually, the Palestinian Authority was turned over to Mahmoud Abbas, the man who's in control right now. Within a year, by 2005, Arafat was dead and Abbas was fully in control of the Palestinian leadership, although at this time Hamas's support, especially amongst Gazans, was rising. By 2005, Israel under the hawkish Prime Minister Ariel Sharon called for an unprecedented full withdrawal from Gaza. This included not only military and government officials, but also forced the removal of Jewish and Israeli people who lived in that area, even for generations. This removal of the Jews from Gaza, by force, set the stage for a power struggle in the Palestinian territories. The newly formed Palestinian Authority under Abbas and their rival group Hamas were now locked in a battle for the direction of the Palestinian people. This came to a head when, in 2006, an election is called for the Palestinian Authority, deciding on who's going to lead the Palestinian people. Hamas was seen as the armed struggle, no negotiation, no giving up land party, whereas Fatah, or the PA, is seen as the peace through negotiation party. Who would the Palestinian people vote for and vote into power? After a very contentious election, the result was a victory for Hamas, which received 44% of the vote. They won 74 out of the 132 seats, while the ruling Fatah party only received 41% of the vote and won only 45 seats. The current government under Mahmoud Abbas had to turn over power to the new leader of the Palestinian government, the Hamas leader who had been nominated to form a new government. This did not go well. Almost immediately, the two parties were locked in a heated civil war. There were murders in the streets of Gaza as both sides fight to try and hold on to power. We have to remember that it's not only the ability to set official policy and laws over the Palestinian-controlled areas, but it also gives access to the millions of dollars that the international world gives to the Palestinian cause. Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian government currently, is alleged to have a net worth of somewhere around $100 million, according to one of his own financial advisors. As the civil war between these two was coming to a close, possibly because Hamas was going to succeed, Israel granted the Palestinian Authority the ability to take many of its leaders and followers to live in the West Bank. After this, it essentially split the Palestinian government into two: the internationally recognized Palestinian Authority of Mahmoud Abbas and the marginalized government of Hamas in Gaza. Neither side has had an election ever since. Up until the recent past, these two groups maintained two separate governments with two sets of policies around terrorism and peace talks. That is until the recent attempts over the last few years for Hamas to gain much larger control in the West Bank, risking the control of the Palestinian Authority in their own area. This brings us to the current situation. The Palestinian Authority, which is run by Fatah, has been able to use their armed wing and the Palestinian security forces, likely with the help of Israel, to keep Hamas-linked terror factions down and maintain control over their area. This has become much more difficult over the last number of years, as the Palestinian Authority has done little to help their own people in achieving a better life. Hamas, a radical message of hate and blaming Israel, has found great footholds in the West Bank. Many people are wanting a change from their many years under the Palestinian Authority, who's given them very little. Whole areas of the West Bank are now becoming aligned with Hamas and other terrorist groups, and the Palestinian Authority will not attempt to arrest or remove them for various reasons. For more information on this, check out our previous episode, "This is all the Palestinian Authority's fault." The Palestinian Authority has recently admitted that they will leave security matters of their own area to Israel and the IDF. Their reasoning behind why they are unable and unwilling to deal with the anti-Israel terror coming from their own region is because the PA cannot be seen as helping Israel to arrest Palestinian terrorists. It doesn't look good for them, to their people who are growing more and more angry with their government for the lack of improvement to their lives. They continue to blame Israel for their current living conditions and yet allow Israel to come in and arrest Palestinian people. They know that they're already losing their grip on their control and will do anything to maintain it, even having to be seen as supporting anti-Israel terror in order to win favor among their people, who are becoming more and more radical. Some people may ask, why now? The civil war has been going on for over 20 years. Why are we seeing an elevation in these issues now? Some may suggest that this is a natural escalation from a pot that's been boiling for 20 years, although I would suggest, like others have, that there may be some history repeating itself. In the early 2000s, we saw an escalation in violence and a power struggle because the leader, Yasser Arafat, at the time 75, was ending his political career, and it created a vacuum for power. Mahmoud Abbas is currently 88 and is likely to either step down or pass away in the near future. There's a civil war going on in the hearts and the minds of the Palestinian people. But this is also a job interview. All terrorist groups are putting out their resume and platform for what they'll do if they gain power to represent the Palestinian people. Further proof of Hamas trying to take on the role of leadership over the entire Palestinian population is how Hamas has been acting within the last few weeks. Hamas has been attempting to consolidate its power and create its own allies in the region. Hamas has met with the Saudi kingdom this past weekend, in hopes of restoring relations with the kingdom after a number of rocky years, including Saudi Arabia arresting a number of Hamas terrorists within their kingdom. Hamas has also met with the Lebanese Hezbollah leader in order to discuss their mutual plans to attack Israel in the north and the south. This seems eerily similar to the days before Fatah became the official Palestinian Authority under the peace accords. They were a terrorist organization with blood all over their hands until the Arab world demanded that they be included in peace talks and speak for the Palestinian people. Not long after, they became the official Palestinian government, signing peace treaties at the White House with blood all over their hands. It is clear that there is a major shift happening in many ways. The Palestinian Authority is losing credibility and control over their own people, and there's a power grab for legitimate control over the leadership position and the millions of international dollars that they're able to steal. In the end, we can see that the current rise of violence is a power struggle that has sat under the surface of the Palestinian people since nearly their beginning. What is also very clear is that neither party, Fatah or Hamas, really cares much for the betterness of their people's lives, but only about gaining control over the people and their policies towards Israel. Oh, and of course the money. What is going to happen if the Palestinian Authority becomes more and more disliked by their people, and the leader Abbas passes away? Will the Arab world's attempts to bring these two factions together in order to have the first election in 20 years work? If so, would either side even accept the results? The last time we saw the death of a leader for the Palestinian people, we saw death and destruction in the streets as those who wanted the top spot and all the money and fame that comes along with it began murdering one another. Is this going to happen again? If Hamas ends up taking over, will Israel be forced to go back to the pre-2000 years where Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, will become so volatile and have no legitimate government that they will be forced to go in and maintain order? Will the Palestinians lose all of the gains they've made through peace negotiations? What happens to any chance for peace with Israel and the Palestinian people when the new leadership of the PA under Hamas has no interest in the negotiation process, only rocket fire? One thing is clear: the failure of the Palestinian Authority to provide their people with better lives, likely due to their own poor government, may lead to their own downfall, and Hamas is able to capitalize on the discontent of their people in order to grow their own support. Any future election will surely see Hamas elected to government by fear or force. I'm truly scared for a day where Gaza is going to be the future model for all Palestinian civilization. It is a very scary thought for the Palestinian people, who deserve better, and for the Israeli people, who deserve a partner for peace, because it seems like Hamas is currently winning this one, unless something drastically changes. This has been another episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. Don't forget to check us out on social media at jdr.podcast, and check out some of our other episodes on your favorite podcast source. We'll see you next time.